The first true instance of Pokemon in the third dimension, Pokemon Stadium. A beloved classic that allowed one to pop in their Gen 1 game into the new Transfer Pack peripheral and see them in a new lively look. But the Pokemon Stadium we know is actually the second one in Japan, as there was actually one unreleased Pokemon Stadium prior that was released with a lot less content, such as having only 42 of the 151 Pokemon. Together with early animations, cut cups, and even unused moves, today on Cut Content, we shall explore the beta unused content of Pokemon Stadium. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. Now, as mentioned, an older version of Pokemon Stadium was released in Japan that contained less Pokemon. This was because the game was following the strategy of utilizing the 64 disk drive with the game. Aside from several games being developed as all-out 64 disk drive games, some were being made as base N64 games with the idea of expanding upon them utilizing these magnetic discs. Games such as Ocarina of Time were planned most famously for this, while F-Zero actually did get such a release. Pokemon Stadium as such was being designed around the idea, with the expansion disc giving the player the full 151 set of Pokemon. As such, the original version does have some 64DD data left over, all being error messages, including a device communication error, a damaged 64DD error, and one for the jumper pack being in instead of the required expansion pack. While in development, trailers for the game came out that showed that some of the Pokemon had more cruder models, such as Bulbasaur having a different head shape, Ekans with a white tongue, Pidgeotto being very blocky, and Rattata being more angular in its design. In fact, the early trailers showed some early animations too, like Blastoise actually having a kick animation for Mega Kick here, something while in the Western version of Stadium wasn't in this early version. Meanwhile, Charizard's feint animation was slightly less animated and didn't have the unique camera angles of the final game, which in fact both Hydro Pump and Fire Spin originally had a unique camera angle associated with them, not seen in the final game. The game's HUD also had some differences. Most notably, there were Pokemon animations in battle, and as well as the classic battle menu of the actual games. Also, early more cruder designs for the menu backgrounds. Now, while the Japanese original had a Pokedex, one surprisingly complete despite only having 42 usable Pokemon, there was also in the data an early versions of that Pokedex that was very bare bones and barely worked. This along with the team battle feature that wasn't implemented in this version also being in the data still, likely part of the 64 disk drive expansion. Eventually, when the signs were clear that the 64 disk drive wasn't something to put your faith into with all the delays that were happening, Pokemon Stadium Japan decided to drop the feature entirely and release the game plus its expansion as one complete cart. This became the international version of Pokemon Stadium that we experienced here with the complete 151 roster. This version updated several models too, such as Poliwrath with a much cleaner swirl, Arbok with now a better pattern and a lot thicker too, Ivysaur with better details and textures overall, Nidoking having a completely different and more threatening model, meanwhile Vulpix with a completely new design that was much closer to the sprite as we know, versus the more rounded design it had originally. And with this version came a variety of other cut content too. These include a set of unused move effects, being status ailment related that no moves use. These are of course a carryover from Pokemon Red and Blue, which also had them unused. As well, there is also an unused Pokedex entry for the substitute Pokédoll, this being likely designated for Missing No, who if transferred to Pokemon Stadium, appears as a substitute Pokédoll and not usable in battle. Also, this unused Butterfree banner, likely meant for displaying the game's locations at one point before Clouds took its place. And weirdly enough, there's also a Metapod listed as a trainer. What will it do? Just use Harden all day? Now, an interesting bit here is the existence of a Diglett able to learn an asset at level 1, something that is not possible. This is in fact an unused event move, as event moves are usually listed at level 1 for Pokemon, such as Surf Pikachu learning Surf is programmed at level 1. But this brings us to the horde of cut content from the Japanese to the English version of the complete Pokemon Stadium game. Let's begin with the big one first. The fact that the international version cut 3 cups from the game, these being the Nintendo Cup 1997, 1998, and 1999. At the time in Japan, there were yearly Pokemon tournaments called the Nintendo Cups, with specific rules such as picking 6 Pokemon and sending out 3. A lot like Pokemon Stadium's rules, in fact. What the Japanese version of the new Pokemon Stadium did was design the cups based around the rosters of several of the trainers that competed, so as such you actually faced off against tourney-made teams. Now, because it was cut, 7 of the trainers from the 98 Cup are found in the data of the Western version, unused of course. And of course, for the international version, they replaced all 3 with a singular Poke Cup instead, with completely new and more diverse teams at that. Speaking of which, the rental Pokemon for several of the cups had different moves made for them. Poke Cup making sense since it was new trainers, the rest are a head scratcher though. As well, Japan allowed you to register 12 rental teams versus the international version only allowing you for 10 for some reason. Now what is left in the international version's data is data of Pokemon Green compatibility. Normally, Stadium's international version has been programmed to not read the Japanese games, but here it is still in the data, in case I guess Nintendo got bored and released Green. As well, there was an altered sound too. When booting up the game, you normally hear Pikachu's cry. But in the Japanese version, you hear people scream 64 in Japanese. Aside from these, we got of course the usual name changes to things like badge names here graphically, but as well we have a case of censorship too. For one, we have the Japanese Nidoqueen, who would normally grab her breasts going into battle. Meanwhile, the international version has her shaking them. Is this actually censorship? But the real censorship comes in the later version of the game, whereby Jinx, who in version 1.0 of the game had black skin, was changed to purple skin in version 1.1 of the international version. Eventually, the game released in North America on February 29, 2000, selling well over 4 million units on this limited Nintendo 64 install base, and thus becoming one of its best-selling games. Eventually, with the release of the second generation of Pokemon, the game got a well-deserved and bigger sequel, Pokemon Stadium 2, a game I plan to cover eventually, so hit the subscribe button for I plan to be back with more Pokemon and other games cut content soon. Hit the like button and comment below on if you would have liked any of the Japan-only features to have been brought over too. So everyone, thank you for watching!